Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We are so excited to be here with Deirdre White, PYXERA Global CEO. We have a great agenda lined up, so a little bit of controversy for all of you today to get us started with. And then we're really excited, I'm really excited to talk to you, Deirdre, about everything that PYXERA Global has planned in 2015. So let's dig right in. 2015, it's a big year. In a lot of ways, historic even maybe. Can you talk about some of the things that are coming this year and what makes them special?
Sure. Thanks so much, Alicia, and thanks everyone for joining today. 2015 is a year that a lot of us in the international development community have been looking forward to for some period of time as sort of a watershed year, in the sense that it is the year that the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, expire, and the year that we look to the next 15 years and what we're going to take on as a community in terms of what needs to change in the world. The MDGs, for those who aren't particularly familiar with the process and the content, were developed back in 1990-2000 and were actually ratified by the UN in 2001. And it's a series of 8 goals that set out sort of a shared vision for how we can work together to create a better world. Now, the interesting thing about that shared vision is that it was actually created by a handful of people in a back room. So that creates some inherent problems, of course, in terms of whether or not people feel like they're bought in, whether or not they feel like they've been consulted in this process. And that's been a problem. That's been a complaint about the MDGs, and that's been something that it's been clear from the community that has to be different as we go into the next 15 years.
And there was also, I think, a point about the MDGs being somewhat simple in nature. And we've actually got, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, we've got the image here of what the MDGs were. We'll go to that for all of you now visually. So excuse us while we work our tech on our end.
So they're fairly straightforward goals,
right?
And they make a lot of sense. They're absolutely logical on the surface. There's no reason why we wouldn't all want to say, yes, this is a world that we want to be part of. Now, however, 2 different things happened with these goals, besides the fact that they were created in a back room, as I said. The other thing is there's no strategy attached to them, and that was by design. The idea was, if we put forth this vision, the world will go and do, and it'll all be a better place. And that has happened to some extent, but it certainly has not been as thorough as it might be. The other issue with the MDGs is that the way that they have been measured is flawed. And the issue with that is that, in fact, most people don't know that when they count progress against the MDGs, they're counting back to a baseline of 1990 for almost every indicator there.
Wow.
So we talk about progress that's been made in 15 years, and you can say that we've have the number of people living in extreme poverty over the last 15 years, and actually it's been 25 years that we're counting that we've had the number of people living in poverty. So that's the first problem. A second problem in the same measurement is that India and China have skewed the averages on everything. So when you have a burgeoning middle class like you have in India and China, you've changed the dynamics around poverty and education and healthcare, and the numbers are so huge that regardless of whether there was no progress in Malawi, it looks like the whole world is doing better on some of these indicators. The final thing that I've taken objection to with this is that we're not taking into account what was happening anyway. So we've spent the end of 2014, the beginning of 2015, doing a victory lap and saying, look, this is great, the world is great, we all achieved these MDGs. And what we didn't look at was that if you take the UN's own indicator for Indonesia around poverty, they say that poverty was reduced by half over the period of the MDGs. In fact, when you look, the period starts in 1990 and goes through 2015, and there was a steady decline long before the MDGs were even enacted in 2001. So it's intellectually dishonest to put that forth as a real success story when in fact the progress was happening long before the MDGs came along.
Interesting. So now we're at a point, we've learned a lot from having set a set of goals and worked towards achieving them. And of course, I think everything that you've pointed out about how those goals have been measured is extremely interesting and definitely offers lessons for the future that we can hopefully learn from in round 2. So now we're seeing the Sustainable Development Goals ahead of us, which have been announced. There is a little bit of a lack of clarity about how solidified those goals are and what's going to be happening in terms of their ratification. Can you talk a little bit about what's coming?
So we learned a lot from the MDG process. And one of the things we learned was that people want to be consulted. People want to be part of this process. And so this was a very different scenario in that the whole world basically was invited to weigh in their opinions on what should be the Sustainable Development Goals. Extremely inclusive process across the public, the private, the social sectors. And the result of that right now is a draft list of 17. And I think you can see those on your screen.
Yeah, so
now.
let's actually go to those and look at that list of 17. It is quite a list.
So this is a draft proposal that stands at February 3rd. And up until a couple of weeks ago, my presumption was that these would be narrowed down to a list of sort of the 10 priority areas that we could agree upon. And I was fortunate enough to be at the World Economic Forum a couple of weeks ago and sit in on a session on the SDGs and the role of the private sector in moving them forward.
And who was there at that event?
So at that particular event, FSG and the Shared Value Initiative, along with the UN Foundation, convened the event. But the most important guests there, I think, were the 2 UN ambassadors who are responsible for taking the SDGs forward to what is going to be proposed to the UN in September. And one thing they were clear on is that these are not going to change all that much between now and September. So the list is going to be this big.
Wow.
And the targets are going to be this lofty. And they are quite lofty targets. As you can see, it's ending all poverty everywhere. It's ending all injustice everywhere. It's cleaning the entire environment and leaving a sustainable planet. These are all great things, and it is absolutely
by 2030, we'll have achieved utopia.
Right. So I love utopia. I love unicorns and puppies dancing under rainbows as much as anyone else. But like, it's time for us all to have a reality check and figure out what we can really practically do about this.
So one of the things that I think is interesting about the sustainable goals is some of them are, there's been a great deal of celebration around everything that has been achieved as a result of the Millennium Development Goals, which, to be sure, has been significant. But what's interesting for me, I think, and this is our next slide, is which of these goals are very connected, which of the Sustainable Development Goals are connected to the Millennium Development Goals. So let's go ahead and look at that. So here you see end poverty in all its forms everywhere. Yep. Poverty and hunger was one of the Millennium Development Goals. Ensuring healthy lives. Previously it was focused on malaria and HIV and maternal health, and now that's been expanded. So these are the sustainable. They're carried forward and expanded to be much broader in scope. Looking at these goals and what you were saying about their achievement, how do we go about targeting 17 goals? And there are a number of indicators associated as well,
there are
aren't there?
169 indicators.
Wow.
And they are extremely complex. They are, in fact, not all targets. A lot of them really are more methodologies than they are targets. So wow. it's quite a confusing landscape. But for PYXERA Global, and what I would recommend for others that are working in this community, I think the important thing is to say, okay, this is the list. We want to be part of this. We believe in this better world, right, and we want to do something to move the needle on these key challenges that face the world. But we've got to narrow down to the space where we think we can have an impact. And so what we've done is take a look at the list of 17 and say, as an organization, with our skill sets and with the partnerships through which we achieve our goals, these are the 9 that we can have an impact on. And there's actually a 10th one in there. You'll notice.
Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and bring up this list so our viewers can join us in seeing what's in front of us.
Okay. So we've said, basically, here's this handful of goals that we actually think the work we do can have a serious impact on in the coming 15 years. There is another goal. There is a 10th goal, which is set out as goal 17, which is about partnerships for achieving these goals. So we actually don't see that as a goal. That is our methodology. That is how we're going to get there.
That's the means to the end.
Absolutely. We've set that as the umbrella. And then we have chosen as an organization to work toward these goals. And I guess I would say to our viewers that anyone else who's sitting in the same situation, we are looking at a list of 17 and being completely overwhelmed, that you don't have to be part of all 17. You can go and pick and choose and see where you feel like you can actually contribute and then focus there. And that's extremely important to do.
So let's just read through the ones that we're really focused on. You know, hunger, this issue of food security, definitely something where we have had an impact and been working on in a number of venues. Healthy lives, of course, health in all of its forms, not just in eradicating malaria and ensuring maternal health. What are the other ones on here that you think are really interesting or different? You know, there are a lot of indicators here that are, not indicators, goals, that are in some ways derived from the Millennium Development Goals. So they've been development priorities for some time. You know, for example, cities and human settlements and inclusivity. Why is that important for us?
Why is that important for us? One of the reasons that's important for us is because we've actually done a lot of work in this space. We work with and through a number of major multinational corporations that see the re-envisioning of cities, the redevelopment of cities as core to their work. And so we've had an opportunity to work with municipal governments around the world on seeing how they can use technology, how they can use better approaches to recreate the environments in which their people are living. So I think that that's a really important one. And more people are living in cities.
Right.
It's just the reality that we're facing. That's not going to change. That's probably going to sharply uptick even in the coming 15 years. And so I think that that's got to be a key priority.
That's great. So let's change gears a little bit now and talk about PYXERA Global and what's happening for PYXERA Global in 2015. So this is a historic year for the international development community as we pass the baton from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals, but it's a historic year for our organization too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, it is our 25th anniversary, and we're extremely excited about that. We began in 1990 as Citizens Democracy Corps at the time, and we were launched as a direct response to the fall of the Berlin Wall, where there was a lot of enthusiasm in this country about helping businesses in Eastern Europe to transition to working in a market economy. So then Citizens Democracy Corps was created to harness the skills and abilities of American businessmen and women who wanted to go to provide firm level assistance in Eastern Europe and later in the countries of the former Soviet Union. That's our roots. We have since changed immensely. We have gone from a very small NGO who worked only in Eastern Europe and the FSU to a global NGO that's worked in over 90 countries.
FSU for our Millennium
former
viewers.
Soviet Union. Former Soviet Union. We work in over 90 countries. We've worked in over 90 countries. In any given year, we're active in 25 plus of those. We have expanded the area of our work. We were focused for the first 15 years exclusively on the development of small and medium businesses and the infrastructure and institutions that support them. We now work across all of the sectors you mentioned earlier, whether it's agribusiness or technology or health or water or education. These are all touched by our work today. So those things have changed. Another thing that's changed over the course of the past 25 years is we've grown not just in terms of countries and scope of work, but we have joined forces with a number of other organizations over the course of the years. So in the year 2000, the MBA Enterprise Corps, with whom we partnered on multiple projects in Eastern Europe.
Prior to that.
Prior
so they were
to
a
that.
partner
They
prior
were a partner
to 2000.
prior to that. We worked all over the region, and the MBA Enterprise Corps brought recent MBA grads on 15-month assignments across the globe. And they were working at the firm level to build the capacity of these businesses. So we first joined forces with the MBA Enterprise Corps. Fast forward a few years, and MBAs Without Borders, which was a Canadian NGO that had a similar mission to MBAEC, but a broader set of volunteer advisors and a broader set of schools they worked with and a broader set of countries they worked in. It made a lot of sense for us to go ahead and combine forces with them. So that was another part of our growth process.
And that was in 2000?
That was in 2009.
Okay.
And then most recently, a couple of years ago, we started discussions with what was then the U.S. Center for Citizen Diplomacy. And we felt really strongly that the work of the U.S. Center in terms of creating global fluency and building relationships across borders was at the absolute core of everything we do. And so we came to agreement with the U.S. Center, now just the Center for Citizen Diplomacy, to work together with them toward a better future.
That's great. So and I just want to remind our viewers, please do feel free to use the Q&A option in the Google Hangout to submit your questions for Deirdre today, or for me if you have any. And also join us on Twitter. The hashtag is PYXERA Global 25. PYXERA Global 25. So coming back to our conversation, 25 years of legacy impact is a long time.
Very
looking back at that history, what has the organization achieved? What are the major milestones that, as we're looking towards the future, we're trying to learn from?
Well, we're actually in the process of trying to figure out the answer to that very question. I think we know it in sound bites, but one thing that happens when you work in this field is you have projects that are 2 or 3 or 5 years long, and you do an impact assessment maybe during the project, maybe immediately after it. But you rarely have the opportunity to go and look back across many years and say, what did it mean that we worked in Russia in the year 1994? Maybe that wasn't the best example. But what we've decided to do, yes, we want to celebrate our 25th anniversary, but we really want to use it as an occasion for reflection, an occasion for strategic planning for how we're going to go forward for the next 25 years. And one way to do that is to say, what really did matter? What did we learn over these 25 years? So we're doing a very broad impact study, looking across all of our practice areas, all of our work, many of the countries we worked in, and seeing what worked, what's the impact today of what happened back in 1994 or in 2004, what didn't work. And I think this is really important, is that we have made a commitment to be extremely honest about what didn't work. And that's something that's really, really missing in our field of practice, is an honest look at where were resources wasted? Where was this not such a good idea? And how do we ensure we don't go down that path again? And we want to make sure that we capture that information. I think most of what we're going to capture is going to be very, very positive. And it's really important to note that we could not have gotten to all of those positive results without the incredible community of people that we work with. We have touched tens of thousands of lives around the world, and they have touched ours over the last 25 years. And those start from our staff, and I am often known to say I work with the most talented, passionate people on the planet, and I'm proud to do that every day. But it's beyond our staff. It's our staff, it's our volunteer advisors from back in the early days of the organization. It's those MBAs Without Borders volunteers and MBAC advisors that went out. It's our global pro bono participants who are working for major multinational corporations to build capacity. It's our host clients and host organizations around the world, which
in those 90 countries,
in those 90 countries. It's our current and former board members. There's this entire community of people that have been connected to us over the years, and they're the ones who have made the progress that we've been part of possible.
So what has happened to all of those tens of thousands of people? Where are they in the world, and what are they doing?
That's both a great question and an embarrassing question, because one of the places where we've really fallen down on the job as an organization is in staying in touch with that community of people. We have made various attempts over time, before the internet,
pre-internet contact list. Someone has a Rolodex somewhere, right?
We did some, we did regular monthly newsletters to try and stay in touch and capture people's stories and stuff. Once the use of internet was a lot more widespread, we did do irregular updates to the community. But we have also said, as part of our 25th anniversary, that we want to make a concerted effort to re-engage with this broad community of people. And so we've actually started something that we're calling Borderless, a global engagement community. And we have created a place on our website if you go to our landing page.
Yeah, so let's actually pull that up now. Great.
Okay, so if you go to our landing page, you can see this icon for Borderless, a global engagement and community. If you are someone that we have worked with in any of those ways I described, if you're someone whom we have touched and has touched us over the years, we want you to be part of this Borderless community. So we hope you'll go and check it out and sign up and re-engage with us and be part of our journey for the next 25 years.
We'll see you at the 50th anniversary.
Exactly.
So all of this, all of these people, this incredible geographic reach, the impact that you've had in this exciting impact study that's underway, I'm sure you and others here at PYXERA Global have learned things along the way. Is there a way that you're trying to take those lessons forward into the future?
Yeah, I think there's two things that really stand out for me personally, and I think have driven a lot of the direction we've gone as an organization. And I've been working in this field for 27 years now, so have seen a lot in a lot of places. And the two things that really stand out is that if you are looking at the most egregious social problems facing the world today, that there is no way that any one individual, organization, any one sector is going to be able to even incrementally affect or improve those challenges. And that the only way for us to be able to affect change is through really strong, really effective, really honest partnerships. So that's something that is just core to everything we do today at PYXERA Global. The second thing is that the approach you take really matters. And so I've worked in this field that is called international development for so long. And I really, as a person, take exception to the term development because I think it sets up from the beginning a relationship that does have a hierarchy and that's not productive to social change. And so we within the organization—
Say a little bit more about what you mean about that hierarchy dynamic.
Well, the easiest way that I usually put it is that development is something you do to someone or something, where we use the term engagement. That's something that's with someone or something. And if partnership is at the core of the way you think you solve problems, then you have to change the way you think about what the relationship is. And it has to be a with relationship, not a to or for relationship, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So we've made an effort here to change the language we use about the work we do. And in particular, we don't talk about working in development anymore. We talk about working in the field of purposeful global engagement. And purposeful, it's meaningful. It's meaningful to all the parties in the equation. And it is about engagement and about togetherness and about problem solving on an equal basis and not in any kind of hierarchical way.
So what does that mean? Purposeful global engagement. How can we go forward in that new paradigm?
We've been sort of muddling through for a while. And actually muddling through is maybe not entirely fair to us. I think we've progressed to a place where this is what we practice or what we try to practice, but without ever having put words or a framework to it. So what we've decided to do, again, using the occasion of the anniversary, is to create a framework around the principles of purposeful global engagement. And we know we don't know it all. We know what we know at PYXERA Global, and we know it well, but there's a community of people that has an opinion on this, that also wants to engage differently, and that we want to hear from. And so we have created a survey online as a first step in this process. You can get there either by the link, which I think may be showing on your screen right now, or you can navigate there through the Borderless page of our website. And what you have an opportunity to do there is to look at some of the things we've set out as core to how you engage purposely, to what we think purposeful global engagement is. You can provide your input on those, or you can add your own things that we haven't thought of to date. And at the end of this year, our intention is to gather all that information into a framework that can be used by any individual organization who says, yeah, I'd like to do things a different way for the next for the next 15, 25 years, whichever timeline you're counting.
Right. 15, 25, 100. That's great. So I'd like to go now, we've covered a lot, and I'd like to go now to our viewers for some of the questions that all you have submitted via Twitter and the Google Hangout questions. So Again, those questions can be submitted to us via Twitter at hashtag PYXERA Global 25 or via the Q&A mechanism in the Hangout itself. So one of our first questions was about MBAs Without Borders, one of PYXERA Global's signature initiatives. Can you talk a little bit about what the vision for growth is for that part of the organization and why it's important?
Sure. I think that the work of MBAs Without Borders is extremely important, both within the context of PYXERA Global and how the MBAs can be a resource to the larger programs that we're working on, but also just in the skills that they can bring to their projects and also what they bring back to their future professional careers. It's been a challenging area of our work in terms of finding the appropriate partners and funding sources for those types of programs. So we worked for many years fairly exclusively with USAID on our MBA programs. And I mean, what we call MBAs Without Borders now is an umbrella term for the MBA Enterprise Corps and MBAs Without Borders as one. So historically, we were funded fairly exclusively by USAID in those programs. We've gotten much more creative in the ensuing years. We have been able to place MBAs both within some of our larger enterprise and community development programs, but we also have some strategic partnerships around impact investing and where investments are going into social enterprises, having some MBAs Without Borders advisors go along with those investments to ensure that the funds are used as wisely as possible and actually serve the best growth of the enterprise. The other place we found that there's a lot of opportunity for the MBAs Without Borders is in capacity building for NGOs. So where you have an NGO who's working in the health sector and maybe doesn't have the same set of business skills that could drive forward that organization's growth and effectiveness. We found that placing MBAs Without Borders advisors there has been a very good tool. So we're looking at other ways. We're being extremely creative. Jaylon Adley, who runs those programs for us, has also recently convened an alumni council, and the alumni council has been enormously helpful in helping us to envision the growth path for MBAs Without Borders.
That's great. Let's talk about the other signature initiative at PYXERA Global, the Center for Citizen Diplomacy. Can you talk a little bit about what citizen diplomacy is and why it's important to the work that PYXERA Global does, and maybe what's ahead for the center this year?
Sure. So citizen diplomacy is the concept that we all have an obligation to be citizens of the world, that we have an obligation to build relationships across borders, that it is in our interest as individuals, it's in the interest of our nations, for us to shake hands across long distances, that it's part of economic security, it's part of building business relationships, but it's also part of creating this mutual understanding that creates a more peaceful world. The Center for Citizen Diplomacy focuses its work around supporting any kind of programs that are working toward what I call global fluency. So, and that's different than cultural competency. It's not about knowing a language and a culture. It's about understanding how to engage with people regardless of where they're from and regardless of what language they speak. And so I think given the profile of PYXERA Global's work, it makes a whole lot of sense that we need to have globally fluent people to participate in the kind of work we do. We need to have globally fluent people if we're going to move the needle on the Sustainable Development Goals. This is not going to happen in isolation, and that process of building relationships regardless of what the barriers are is what is at the heart of the center's work. And there's two main ways that the center is currently exhibiting that work. So the first one is we have the Network for Citizen Diplomacy, and this is a membership group of organizations that are all working in this global exchange of ideas and people space. And they join the network for opportunities to learn from and interact with one another, organizations that might not have otherwise met. that I think is a great resource for the community. And the second thing that is one of the more exciting things we're doing with the center right now is we're working on these higher education workshops, which are bringing the concept of global fluency into universities around the countries and really giving students the tools to learn some of the skills that we learned on the ground a little later in life. So
that's great. We've got a couple questions here about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So one is, one of our viewers has asked what the public input mechanism was for the Sustainable Development Goals. The other is there something that should be on the list that isn't, in your opinion? So I'll let you answer the first part of that question and pull up the list for us to look at together. So talking about that public input mechanism, how have they gone about that?
So in a couple of ways, there have been a number of working groups that were convened that gave people the opportunity to provide input. And those, in some cases, they were very sector specific, sort of a private sector working group, a public sector working group, an NGO working group, but then also trying to cross-fertilize the information they got from those. But there's also been an online opportunity, and theoretically still is an online opportunity for people to weigh in and provide their ideas. So if you go to the UN's website, you can actually weigh in on the areas that are of the biggest priority to you. Is there something missing from the list? I guess I would say it's hard to imagine anything that's missing from this list of 17. What I think is a bigger question is there a way to reorganize the list? Because some of the things here, end poverty in all its forms everywhere really is an outcome of a number of the other goals that are within this. Change the climate or combat climate change is really not a goal in and of itself, but is something that the others can add up into. There's one that's about justice of all, and I can't see the list too well from here, but there's one about justice in an equitable world, and that's really sort of
promoting peaceful and inclusive
societies
societies for sustainable development,
reducing inequality within and among countries. So I think we if we're going to be honest with ourselves, we need to look at this list and say these are not all equal goals. In fact, they're not even all goals. So let's rearrange. But it feels to me, looking at this, like we've covered pretty much every topic that we can, and that's what I most fear, is that we're diluting our focus,
trying to go too broad
by putting everything in the kitchen sink into the mix,
and not being able to go deep
now,
enough.
That said, the Ambassador Kamal, who's the UN ambassador from Kenya, was talking about why 17? Why aren't we paring this down? And he said something really inspirational, which is we are at a level of human ambition that's never been known, and that this really is achievable. And so, it's great for us to strive for that, but let's just pluck out also the practical pieces that you and I can affect on a day-to-day basis.
We have another question here about the impact of PYXERA Global, and perhaps it's more of a theoretical question in a way. Today and in the future, how do you measure impact, and what will we report on 25 years from now as an organization?
Yeah. It's a really challenging question in that what we in the past reported on for impact, so across our programs, was very program specific and program defined and donor defined. So who's paying for the project decides what they want you to count. Do they want you to count number of jobs? Is that the most important indicator? What I'm hoping that we learn from this impact study process is a set of both micro and macro level indicators that we will, regardless of what a client or a donor wants, that we will track going forward. And so what I mean by that is that oftentimes what we see is, okay, we went in, we did a piece of work, the piece of work was done, it was useful, okay, the box is checked, impactful. But what we hear from local clients in Tanzania is that as important to
Tanzania
them,
and everywhere else.
Tanzania as an example. What we hear from a local client is that yes, the deliverable was good. Yes, it helped us as an organization, but much more important to us was the process of how we did the work, and that helped us to rethink how we're doing our work in the future. So we need to figure out, as we hear those stories, as we go through this impact study, what's a bigger set of indicators that we can take forward. And I say that at the same time, we also have to figure out what's the right periodicity to measure in. It's not enough to measure just at the end of the program, and it's not enough to measure after 25 years. So how can we create the right framework to measure at intervals that make sense and that tell us something about how effective our work is? The short is, we don't have an answer to that question yet. We recognize it's a challenge. We're working on it, and we expect to have an answer before the end of this anniversary year.
One of the things that I think makes that challenging is that PYXERA Global works in so many different streams. So we've talked about MBAs Without Borders. We've talked about the Center for Citizen Diplomacy, but those are just two signature initiatives within the context of an organization where the bulk of the work is actually other than that.
Sure.
So can you talk about what's coming this year in the global pro bono practice area and perhaps the integrated community development practice area, you know, the any milestones that we see ahead?
So there's sort of three main buckets to our work beyond the initiatives that we just talked about. The first one is our global pro bono work, and some people call it international corporate volunteerism. This is where we are working with major multinational corporations in designing programs to take their top talent to go to work with local organizations, NGOs, local governments, small businesses around the world to help to build the capacity of those organizations. It's a win-win-win program. The companies win by developing their talent and exposing them to future markets. The participants are developing leadership skills and all types of personal awareness. The local organizations are getting access to skill sets that they would not otherwise have access to, skill sets and resources. Excuse me. So that's one area of our work, and this is a practice area that has grown and grown over the last several years. If in 2008 we had one client that was doing this type of work, now we're closing in on 20 major multinational corporations that see real value in sending scores of their employees every year to do this type of work abroad. And the opportunities to do this work are endless.
Right.
The opportunities for good assignments are endless. So this can grow as far as it wants to. One of the things that will be interesting as we roll into 2015 is to take a look at what we set out as our own PYXERA Global Sustainable Development Goals, and to see where we're able to find real opportunities for impact by focusing the various company programs on specific ones of those goals.
So companies, you know, some of our corporate partners are, you know, I mean, across a really wide range. I mean, we could name them all here, but that you know, they are all part of the International Corporate Volunteerism Leadership Council, which is a group of, I think, about 25 companies, right, that are all working on this effort. And so the Sustainable Development Goals provide a great frame for collaboration and finding potentially this year some cross-cutting themes that we can maybe. Many of our clients have expressed an interest in collaborating, and so potentially finding those opportunities to build more partnerships around the Sustainable Development Goals, and
to connect things like the global pro bono programs to some MBA programs, for instance. You know, there's lots of opportunities for cross fertilization, and that's what we're working on, is trying to make sort of a more common storyline and not have it just be separate buckets. The other things that we've been working on in our economic and community development practice, integrated community development. So this is the type of work we're doing, getting very, very deep at perhaps even a village level and understanding the needs of a community, and then harnessing the resources that can help that community move forward in the way that it envisions. And the key example of that program, or our signature example of that right now, is the Jiva program, which is the Joint Initiative for Village Advancement. And it's a program that is serving 3 villages in rural Rajasthan, India, working on small-scale infrastructure, agricultural livelihoods, and education programs. And that's a really exciting program. There's a lot you can read about it on New Global Citizen. You can hear about the changes that have happened in the community. And it's one of the things that I'm just most excited about that we're working on today.
And that's a long-term project over a period of years.
So that's a 5-year project, and that's with the John Deere Foundation. They made a 5-year commitment to work with these villages in this very immersive way. And it has, in my estimation, been one of the most impactful things I've seen in my entire career. It's early days, early results, early impact, but really, really, really impressive. And I think it's because we really took that partnership approach. We really took that engagement approach, not a development approach. And that's why we are where we are today with that work.
So that's one of the questions we have is, aside from being mutual, how do you and other people in organizations practice purposeful global engagement? And maybe the Jiva Project is an example of that. Maybe you can talk about how that project got started.
So this project actually has a long and interesting history. The villages were decided upon because there was a executive level trip that took place from John Deere, where they were basically going to do a service trip in India. And so they went out and they got to know these communities, and the communities sort of got under their skin. They felt like, oh gosh, we can't just do this one assignment and walk away and feel good about this. So as a company, they decided that they were going to make a longer term commitment. And they first did that in the forms of some grants to a local university and a local NGO, but they were very useful, but sort of one-off type support. Fast forward a couple of years, and they said, we've been doing these global pro bono programs looking at other parts of the world. What if we took a global pro bono team together with you, PYXERA Global, and our grantee partners, and really went out and looked at what does this community need and what might we be able to contribute over the long term. And we went out. I was lucky enough to be part of the assessment team, and we conducted a 3-week-long participatory community assessment. So this is 3 very small villages in rural Rajasthan. It was 60-person weeks that went into actually going and really hearing what was happening on the ground. And what I give John Deere an enormous amount of credit for is that it's so easy for a donor to decide what they want to give and not what is actually needed. And in this case, John Deere was reaching out to understand really what was needed and then was prepared to contribute what they could to fill those gaps. So I think that's been a big difference in that program.
Who else was with you on those assessment teams?
So the assessment team was made up of several of us from PYXERA Global, was made up of several people from the local agricultural university. Our partners, our fantastic local NGO partners in the community. And then it was made up by, I want to say 10 John Deere mid-senior level executives who ranged from HR specialists to agronomists to communications folks.
So that was also a global pro bono program.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we had this whole set of different skills and abilities and perceptions that were able to just come together and formulate what is now a pretty incredible program.
Great. Well, this is year 3 for Jiva? Year 4?
This is year 3.
Year 3. So
year 3 of program operations after the assessment was completed. Yeah.
Okay, so going into just reaching the halfway point and looking forward to everything that will come in the next year and the next 2 years to follow. We have a question about the borderless community and how people can get involved. So I know you said at a high level, welcoming everyone to sign up and join the listserv. What are other actions that we are asking people to take?
Have my Marco Rubio moment. The other actions we're asking people to take. So we're asking people to sign up. so that they can receive our communications. We are asking them to participate in upcoming events that we have, both virtual and in-person events. We are asking them to share their stories, to tell us, when we talk about an impact study, yes, we're going to go out and study stuff on the ground, but a lot of the impact is just on individuals and how their lives changed as a result of what they participated in.
Almost an oral history.
Exactly. So there's an opportunity there for people to say that this is what I went, this is what I did, and this is the impact it had on my own life. And we expect to be able to take some of that information and draw them into bigger stories for New Global Citizen and beyond. They can go in and connect to the Purposeful Global Engagement Survey and weigh in there and tell us where we've gone wrong in our presumptions on what should be
or
our
where
principles.
we've gone right. So the Principles of Global Engagement Survey, we've identified 15 potential principles. Is that right? And we're asking everyone to just vote on their top 8.
Their top 8, exactly. So, and when you go there and when you look at it, there's a lot of them that seem like they're a little bit repetitive, but we did that intentionally because, as we talked about earlier, language counts. So we wanted to see what language most resonated with folks in terms of how they see these principles. But there's the 15 that are the ones that we came up with here at PYXERA Global. We expect and hope that we're going to get a lot more out of the rest of the community once they see what's missing.
And so events are one of the ways, one of the modes of engagement for that input. Isn't that right? So over the course of this year, of course we'll be looking forward to your input on the survey, but also hosting a series of events around the United States and trying to bring together key stakeholders for some of their input in person on those as well.
Absolutely. So we have already planned a series of roundtables around the U.S. and they are taking place in Seattle. One was already in Minneapolis, Houston,
and New York,
right? And one other,
and also here in Washington,
and also
DC,
here in Washington,
of course.
And then we're also doing a series of events overseas in some of the countries we're working in, and we're still figuring out the schedule on some of those, but it will all be available on the website. So if you sign up for the Borderless community, you'll get plenty of information about all the upcoming events.
And then the virtual event. So this is the first webcast this year, but we're actually looking forward to hosting 7 more of these focused on the different issues within the SDGs. So we'll be using the PYXERA Global Sustainable Development Goals as part of our frame for the year ahead and the different issues that we'll be looking at. We'll be excited to hear from all of you and to bring into the conversation our corporate partners, clients, and others who have things to share about the sustainable goals and how they can potentially shape what we are able to accomplish together in partnership. I am personally extremely excited for PYXERA Global's 25th anniversary celebration, which, drumroll please, we expect this November here in Washington, D.C. So you are all the first to know. Save the date, November 10th through 12th. That's a Tuesday through Thursday here in Washington.
And not just a celebration. And
not just a celebration.
Normally our conference takes place this spring. And I know people have been really looking forward to and waiting for their save the date for our April conference, but we're actually shifting the conference to the fall this year. We're going to go a little bit beyond the topics that we have in the past, and again using the Sustainable Development Goals as sort of an anchor for the conversation, looking at different ways that public-private social sector partnerships can affect change. So that will all be part of the same celebration. We'll have conference, broadcast, and celebration all in one.
The best yet for our silver anniversary. So I'm just waiting. I think we have a few more questions coming in from our audience. We're just about to wrap up now. So if you have any last questions for Deirdre, please do send them through at hashtag PYXERA Global 25 or via the Q&A on the Google Hangout. So this question is, what kind of partnerships are you still looking for? Any specific kinds of organizations or projects that you'd like to work with? You've been doing this work, as you said, for a long time. What's your purposeful global engagement dream?
What's my purposeful global engagement dream? Wow, that's a really hard question. To us, it's not so much the focus of the partnership, it's the type of the partnership, right? So one of the things that's been frustrating for me as a professional is that partnership was one of the Millennium Development Goals. And as a result, every organization out there came up with a partnerships office. And so they all said, we're going to make partnerships a goal. But making partnerships a goal in and of itself is, I think, relatively useless. And that
you heard it here, folks. First, folks.
and that bears itself out, because the concept of partnership as just I am going to give you money to do what I want you to do. That's not what a partnership is. And people laugh, but I say all the time, if you have a partnership and you never wanted to kill your partner, it's not a real partnership. So what we want is to work with organizations that really want to sit down to co-create something, to give and take, to co-create something with maybe not even necessarily the exact same goal. We might have parallel goals, but as long as they're not mutually exclusive, we are comfortable with that. And that we're not just comfortable with that, we think that sometimes forms the basis of a better partnership. And so it may be that our goal as PYXERA Global is entirely social profit in nature, that our business partner's goal is entirely business profit in nature. But as long as we can figure out a way to move in the same direction, that's fine with us. So the type of partnership is most important, but we're also looking to impact those very areas that we've set out. So whether it's about building businesses and creating jobs, whether it's about access to clean water and sanitation, access to education, about improving global health. Those are the areas that we've picked out as places where we think we have some expertise to move the needle, and we want the kind of partners that want to go on that journey with us, that very complicated journey, and that are willing to invest the time and resources that it takes to create a real partnership.
So we've talked today about the many initiatives that are coming in the 25th anniversary, the impact study, the principles of purposeful global engagement, the borderless community. We've talked a bit about PYXERA Global signature initiatives.
We're going to be tired by December.
We're going to sleep for a very long time. The Center for Citizen Diplomacy, MBAs Without Borders. We've talked a bit about Global Pro Bono and the ICD Leadership Council and our integrated community development practice and the exciting work ahead with Jiva. There's one area of work that we haven't yet talked about, our local content development work, and I want to make sure we talk briefly about that.
Sure.
I know there's been a very interesting project underway in Ghana that is really starting to generate some results. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Ghana is a really interesting case, because here was a country that is a new oil producer that had the lead time and that had the knowledge of the mistakes the rest of the world had made in terms of ensuring local participation in the oil and gas industry, and yet still dragged its feet on figuring out the right framework to ensure that as many local businesses and people were able to benefit from the new industry as possible. And thankfully, just a couple of years after Ghana had got first oil, they finally decided that they would be willing to look at this question of local content in terms of identifying local businesses that have the potential to be suppliers to the oil and gas industry, and then building their capacity to meet the very stringent requirements of the industry. So we have a program in Ghana which is actually funded by USAID, but which is very much a partnership with the private sector, so with the oil and gas operators, with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum in Ghana. And this program is actually working not to deliver so much direct services to Ghanaian SMEs, but to build the capacity of Ghanaian business services providers to build the capacity of Ghanaian businesses. So a very sustainable model. And in fact, it was recently recognized in the oil and gas awards in Ghana. We were a finalist for the award for the best local content program. So that was a real milestone for what's a relatively small program that's having great impact on the ground.
That's great. And a number of contractors a number of service providers have already been hired as a result of the work. I think it's 25. Is that right?
I don't recall the exact number, but that sounds about right to me.
That's great. All right. Do we have any more questions? No more questions from our audience. So thank you all for tuning in today to our Google Hangout. Thank you, Deirdre, for taking the time. I do want to reiterate our save the date here for November 10th through 12th here in Washington, D.C. Put it on the calendar. There will be correspondence coming about that soon. And also stay tuned for more events this year, more webcasts like this one, where we'll be hosting people on a variety of topics. Deirdre, thank you so much for being with us. Any closing comments for our audience?
No, just please come and join Borderless. Keep paying attention this year and reconnect with us. And we look forward to the next 25 years together.
The next 25 years of purposeful global engagement.